I'm so happy to be here today. It's a very exciting moment for me. I'm here to talk about inspiration, which is why we're all here. I think everybody watches TED Talks so that they can be inspired in some way. So for all of you here in the audience, I hope that I can help you, not just to be inspired, but maybe to change the way that you think about getting inspired. Now this word, I only learned it recently and it's really hard to pronounce. I hope I don't butcher it, but it's pareidolia. Pareidolia. Now pareidolia is a psychological condition that I don't suffer from, but I experience it. And the good news is, all of you have this same experience. So we are all the victims of pareidolia, but we're also the benefactors. Because pareidolia is a really cool thing once you get to know what it is. Now, what you're looking at here is an electrical socket. This is a Danish electrical socket. But I'm guessing that when you take a look at it, the first thing that comes to your mind is a cute little smiley face. Isn't that just a cute little face? Now, pareidolia is about seeing faces in inanimate objects. Not just inanimate objects, but also clouds. So, for example, seeing a cloud in an animal shape. That's pareidolia. Now, here's little George. Now, George is going to be guiding us today. George is a cute little electrical socket, and that's his mom. Now, if you'll bear with me, I think you'll start to make some connections that I myself have been making my entire life. Now, I'm sure you can all see the same chicken in these clouds that I see. So, if you can, you have pareidolia. Pareidolia. I have it, and you have it. So, let's talk about more of this phenomenon. But before I get too deep into it, I'd like to tell you where I come from. So, I am an American. I'm living in Turkey. I'm what in Turkish they call it damat. I married into a Turkish family. But I'm from Dorchester, which is an inner city neighborhood of Boston, originally. And I have the native pronunciation under there for you. We say Dorchester. That's how you pronounce it with a Boston accent. Now, Dorchester is not exactly a hotbed of imagination. And when I was a kid, I often found myself wanting to blend in more than stand out. However, it was my pareidolia that was kind of a salvation for me. Because I see little faces and everything, when I'm washing my hands, the faucet turns into a long nose and two eyes. I'm able to kind of entertain myself wherever I go. So I'm never really fully bored anywhere I go. And that is a huge help to my creativity and my imagination. For example, this is the house that I grew up in. It's a really old house, and it was creaky and dusty, but it was also a character for me. So I kind of saw it like this when I was a kid. And when I would enter the door, I felt like I was kind of being gobbled up by my house. And then when I would go to school in the morning, I felt like my house would just spit me out into the world. And it was that kind of weird, you might call it weird, you might call it creative, but that perspective has really helped me later in life as I matured and became an adult. So again, pareidolia. Keep that in mind. And again, if you didn't know about it, don't feel bad, because I just learned about it myself. I didn't know it was really like a psychiatric or psychological phenomenon. Now, it's closely connected with apophenia, which is when the light socket starts talking to you. And you start, so be careful. Make sure you don't actually talk to the light socket. It's okay to recognize faces and animals in the clouds, but when you start making really deep connections between them, that's called apophenia. Not what I'm into. Now, inspiration. Inspiration from the mundane is what I want to talk to you about today. Mundane, that's kind of what we mostly experience in life. We don't always have those incredibly inspirational moments. Probably 95% of our experience as humans is the day-to-day, the sitting in class and daydreaming, the twiddling your thumbs on the subway, the walking outside and just letting your mind drift. That's the mundane experience. And we might think that that's not very inspirational, but I disagree. I think that that is where my greatest inspiration tends to come from. Now, Hayao Miyazaki is an amazing animator, the most legendary Japanese animator. He himself is a master of pareidolia. He sees faces in unusual places. And one thing I love about his films is how he focuses with microscopic vision on the mundane. Things like pouring a teacup and having the tea spill a little bit out on the table, and then having the character wipe that up. and eating rice and having a few grains dropped to the table and then picking those up and eating them. These are really seemingly unimportant details, but they are everything for Miyazaki, and that's what makes his films really stand out. It's not just the fantastical creatures, it's the small minutiae, the little details that make all the difference. Now, this is what I really want to get across to you today, is that when you change your perspective and you start to look for inspiration everywhere, you realize that everything matters and nothing is mundane. Your everyday life, the 95% of the majority of what you do, can be incredibly inspirational if you just open your eyes. Just take that microscopic vision, like Miyazaki, and think about things in a different way. Now, I've worked many jobs in my life, and one of the most impactful jobs that I've had is working at Creedmoor Psychiatric Center. Creedmoor Psychiatric Center is a psychiatric facility in Queens, New York, and I worked here for 6 years. This is before I became a teacher, before I really started illustrating or writing books. And this job was terrifying for me in the beginning. A lot of the patients here at this hospital come from the criminal justice system, and they've been found unfit to stand trial, and so they are placed in this facility, which means there's a high concentration of potentially and often very dangerous people together in one place. Now, I worked here in various capacities. I started as a therapy aide. A therapy aide goes and works with the mentally ill and helps them with their activities of daily living. So, for example, if a patient needed help getting dressed or going to the bathroom or cleaning up, or if they needed to be escorted out to a court date or maybe to a recreational activity, I was the person who guided that individual. And that was great. But I was there for a few years, and I was promoted to the position of safety officer. Now, safety officer is kind of like a hospital police officer. So I was responsible for the safety and care of these patients, especially if crimes were committed within the facility. Now, again, I'm talking very calmly and very coolly about this, but I was terrified the entire time I worked here. I always feared the potential danger or harm that could come to myself or to someone who was in my care. But, again, I tapped into that creative instinct that I had since I was a kid, of kind of being able to notice interesting things in unusual places. And so, as an artist does, they need a canvas. And a lot of times I didn't find myself with paper or, a notepad. And so I did art anywhere I could. And since every day I had a coffee cup, I found the coffee cup made a great canvas for me. So this is a series I call Coffee Cup Dude Gets Sick. So I just used one side to show that he had a little tummy ache there, and the other side, he just couldn't hold it in anymore. And then it finally came out. Now, this was totally unnecessary, but I found it highly entertaining. And so did my colleagues, which was very important, because in this line of work, being able to smile and laugh is really important. To the left, you can see that this is how I like to think my coffee cup starts his day. And to the right, this is how he ends his day. And this might be a reflection of my own emotions tied in there somewhere. But again, this was done just for the sole purpose of making people smile and giving them a laugh in an uncomfortable place that was really hard to smile at sometimes. Now, when I was a safety officer there, I had a front desk position from time to time, and I found it extremely unfulfilling. So I looked around my surroundings, and this is my workstation, and this little guy here is actually an ink tube. So when visitors would come to visit the patients, we would take the ink tube, and we would stamp the visitor. But I just thought it looked like a cute little character, and so I took some stickers, which we also give to the visitors. I gave him some eyes, and then I thought, well, wouldn't it be funny if he were able to design himself on MS Paint? And so that's his handiwork there of himself, his self-portrait. Now again, you might think this doesn't seem a far stretch that you would work in a psychiatric facility with this type of world perspective. But I assure you, this little picture here provided non-stop laughs for my colleagues and for even some of the patients who did see it. There's my computer mouse. Now, this was my lunch one day while I was working there. I couldn't take my eyes off this little teeny piece of lettuce that was stuck to my plate. And I just couldn't help but think how much of a baby shark it looked like. Now again, once you start thinking this way, it's kind of hard to escape. So you kind of have to be careful. But it was at that hospital that I was inspired to write and illustrate my first book. And you'll notice here, the sun has a face. That's not a coincidence. And The Day the Sun Went Away is my first real journey out into the public with my work. Now, this is a children's book written for 4 to 8-year-old children. But it was essential for me, I think, to work at that hospital to develop the kind of perspective and the creativity that led to the creation of this book. And here I am in Turkey all these years later, and this book has carried me to places I could never imagine. And when I arrived in Turkey, it was translated into Turkish by Beta Kids, and by chance it was taken up by the Turkish curriculum. So the schools are, in 4th grade, students all throughout Turkey are now reading Güneşin Gittiği Gün in a unit of their textbook, which is really, I can't tell you how much of an honor that is to me. It's a huge honor. And just take a look at the progression here. There seems to be no connection between where this is now and where it came from. But that's why I want to encourage you to all keep on high alert for inspiration, because inspiration is everywhere. It doesn't matter where you are, you can find it. Now, as a teacher, I'm constantly inspiration hunting because students get bored. Students get uninterested. They daydream. And they see me, and sometimes I know they hear blah, blah, blah, blah, blah, blah, blah, blah, blah, blah. So how can I find creative ways to teach? That's been a mission of mine as a teacher. And it all started back in Hong Kong. My first year of teaching, I taught for a year in Hong Kong. And it was a Confucian school which teaches traditional Chinese values to its students along with the basic curriculum. And it was there that I realized I had no business in a classroom. I had no experience. I wasn't very good at it. And I was sure of that one day when one of my students, during lesson, he was a 1st grade student, he just quietly and calmly stood up from his seat, went into the hallway, and started meditating in the lotus position. Now, there was nothing in my teacher training handbook that told me how to handle this situation. So I was concerned in the beginning. But then I started to look at this unusual scenario, and I found it incredibly inspiring. This boy's father was a practicing Buddhist, and so he was emulating his father's positioning and obviously his methods. And so I just found it so peaceful and inspiring to kind of just look at him and let him be. And a part of me wanted to join him and just say, hey, you know what? I'm not having fun in that classroom either. Maybe you know what you're doing better than I do. Now, in the moment, this could be a crisis or it could be an awakening. It's all about your perspective. But for me, it was an awakening. Shortly after I met this child, I was given this doll. This doll is called a Daruma doll. It comes from Japan originally, and it's kind of a totem good luck charm. And you can find it in a lot of Japanese households. And what the concept is that this character represents the founder of Zen Buddhism. His name is Bodhidharma. And the concept is when you get this doll, he has no eyes. You can see he has 2 white eyes here. And so the mythos of it is that when you get your doll, you give him 1 eye and you make a wish. You wait and you have a year for the wish to come true. If the wish comes true, you give him his 2nd eye. Now I thought that was such a cool concept. But then it got dark. Because after you do this and after you get your wish, you're supposed to throw him in a flaming pit to destroy him. And to my Western brain, I really had a hard time contemplating why you would want to burn the thing that gave you your wish. But it was the perspective that changed. So, from my understanding of it now, once the wish has been manifested or your goal has been achieved, it doesn't really matter what tool you got it from. So, the Daruma doll is kind of really unimportant in the end. It's the realization of the goal, which again I found incredibly inspiring. And it led me to really think about this doll and think about the character of Daruma himself. And so I wrote a book called Daruma's Incredibly Awesome Story, because I just found the story of this doll and subsequent history of this figure to be so fascinating. Now again, we go from having a horrible first year as a teacher, student doesn't want to listen, walks out into the hallway, ignores my lesson, starts meditating, so suddenly I have a book. And the book is really an exploration of the mundane, finding inspiration from the mundane. And you can see right here the striking similarity between my vision of Daruma as a child and the actual child that I taught. Now, talking about inspiration, we all want things quickly, especially in this world where things move so fast. But sometimes you have to take your time, and you have to be open to letting things take their due course. This is my first novel. Now, being a writer, I always had this desire to write a novel, and I thought, this is something I have to do. And so I started it back in 2009, and it was incredibly difficult. I decided to choose the Ottoman Empire as my subject, and it was a big mistake. It was a mistake because I knew nothing about the Ottoman Empire, which meant that I had to research, and research, which was incredibly boring. Now, I used Turkey and Istanbul specifically as the jumping off point for my novel because I found these two buildings to be the most iconic. Whenever I look at Istanbul online from tourism websites, I always see these two buildings. And so Sultanahmet and Hagia Sophia, I said, wouldn't it be cool if I could write a story, a novel, where these two buildings take center stage, where they're active, where people were really using them, where society was really taking place in this location. And so, in researching this novel, I came to Istanbul several times. I went to Topkapı Palace, which is also a central location of the story. I did a lot of research. I spoke to real janissaries. Look at that guy right there. Now, I did a lot of investigative work. And I didn't mind that groundwork because, like I said, my pareidolia makes things fun no matter where I am. So I found this to be actually really exciting and interesting. However, the book would not get finished. I lost inspiration. I lost my plot line. And I really lost the motivation. And so, after about 10 years of sitting on the shelf, this story was unfinished. And sometimes in life you have to remember that patience and letting things take their time and taking their due course is really essential. And I could never know when I started writing this book that the thing I was waiting for was the birth of my daughter. Because the birth of my daughter inspired me to finish. I kept telling myself, now that I'm a father, I don't want to be the kind of person who lets things sit on the shelf. I should finish what I started. And so I decided to wake up early every morning, and she sat right by my side, and I finished the book. And I was so thankful to her that I made her a character in the book. So in this story, she's a very old fortune teller named Zelda. Now, we'll pause there, and I want to take a moment to talk to you all about doing it yourself. Please, if you are a creative person, if you have a story to tell, if you have art that you want to show to the world, do not sit around and wait to be discovered. Nobody has time for that anymore. We live in a world where getting your work into the world is very easy. Anybody can do it. And so I would really encourage you all, self-publish, self-promote, be your own best advocate, and make sure that your work has a chance to see as small or as big of an audience as possible. It doesn't matter. If you find one person who enjoys your work, it's worth it. Now, this is kind of my persona. I've taken this on living here for about 8 years now, going on 9. I think of myself as an American Turk because I'm American and I always will be. I'll always be from Dorchester. But I am also definitely very much Turkish. I've embraced the Turkish culture, and I've done so through my family, my Turkish family. And so I have a YouTube channel where I talk about my experience being an American Turk, and it's all focused on the mundane, the everyday, day-to-day stuff that if I describe it, you think, well, that doesn't sound very interesting. I talk to a cow in Chile. I go to Migros and buy milk. I do things that sound completely uninteresting, but from my perspective and from my lens, it's fascinating. And so again, I would encourage you all to remember, perspective is so important when it comes to inspiration. So be inspired by what's around you. There's tons of inspiration everywhere you look. Now, when it comes down to pareidolia, this concept of finding faces everywhere, I want to get across the point that people inspire people. I'm not talking to an electrical socket today, I'm talking to all of you, and all of you are people. And I find people absolutely fascinating, and I find them inspirational. And here are two of the most inspirational people in my life. These are my daughters, Zelda and Arya. And once you become a parent, you're going to understand how amazing and how inspirational the basic day-to-day life of a child is. And it's because of their perspective. So really what I want to get across is, if you can change your adult kind of growing up mature perspective and just shift it every now and then to look at the world in the eyes of a child, there's no limit to what you can see and be inspired by. My dad taught me how to love the boring. He now passed on, but he passed on his legacy to me. My mother taught me how to appreciate myself exactly as I am, and that just to really respect the fact that I'm enough the way I am. My Turkish family, who has opened up a whole new culture and a whole new world to me. These are the people that inspire me. And if you look here, on the right, this is my wife İpek. She's my ultimate source of inspiration. And next to her is İrem. Now İrem is a Turkish girl who lives in New York City. And she's, in this picture, I believe she's 19 years old. She should be about 30 years old now. And my wife İpek was working as a paraprofessional. So she was helping students in the public school system who had disabilities. So she would help İrem with her daily experience in school. And İrem has severe cerebral palsy. She's had countless surgeries from the time of her birth, eye surgery, spine surgery, you name it. She's confined to a bed and she is nonverbal. However, you can tell from meeting her that her face lights up a room. So for someone with pareidolia who is really into faces, I was immediately drawn to her beautiful face. And I find her to be incredibly inspiring. Now this is my first book signing ever. So the day the sun went away, Güneşin gittiği gün, I self-promoted and self-published in New York. And I went to a bookstore and I had a book signing. And İrem was one of the first people there with her family and her lovely parents, Nihal and Yalçın, who are amazing people. They're from Eskişehir. And they've been raising their daughter in New York with this incredible disadvantage, this physical disability. And they've been doing it with dignity and poise and with dedication. And I find them to be some of the most inspiring parents. With myself being a parent now, I look to them and I'm so inspired by them and by what they've been able to do for their daughter. And the dedication is clear in these pictures. Their daughter is the world to them, and that is truly inspiring to me. Now in this picture you can see that after some years, İrem was able to graduate, make her way through high school. And like I said, she's about 30 years old now. And she inspires me. So I would like you to all take a minute and just think, wow, well, you can look at the world from a light of, wow, things are really terrible. Or you can look at it from, there's inspiration everywhere. And İrem inspires me. Bana ilham veriyorsun İrem. Now, I'd like to close by saying, and please remember this and hold it in your hearts, everything matters. Nothing is mundane. And thank you so much for listening to me today.